Molly Superthorpe. Welcome to my channel, where I offer bite-sized tutorials and demonstrations in calligraphy and hand lettering, and upload a brand new video every Friday. This week we're going to dive into a topic that I'm asked about possibly above all others when it comes to Procreate calligraphy, namely how to achieve beautiful, smooth, elegant, thick and thin strokes in your calligraphy and lettering. In response to a lot of the videos that I make on this channel, people see the way that I seemingly so naturally and easily create thick and thin up and down strokes, and they ask me, how do you do that? And so I want to demonstrate it as clearly as I possibly can in today's video. This lesson is going to help you even if you've never learned traditional ink on paper calligraphy and you're just really struggling with how to emulate those thin to thick strokes that you see other iPad calligraphers doing. But if you do have a background and a training in traditional ink on paper calligraphy, I think this video and this lesson is going to help you as well, because I'm really going to dive into how to take those skills that you learned in ink on paper and translate them to the Apple Pencil and the iPad screen. When the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil were released, I got them right away, and I was really excited to translate my analog calligraphy into the digital realm. But let me tell you, as soon as I opened Procreate, I was really frustrated, and I can't emphasize that enough. I think that a lot of people look at me and other professional lettering artists and feel really discouraged and think it comes so easily to them, what am I doing wrong? Let me tell you, it took me a long time to get used to writing on the glass screen and learning the different tips and techniques that I did accumulate over the years that have helped me master the calligraphic effect in Procreate. So that's what I'm going to really share with you today, but I really want to emphasize that you shouldn't be too discouraged. This takes practice, and it takes really an understanding of what goes into making the thick and thin strokes and how brushes in Procreate function differently than ink on paper pens, but what they have in common as well. So with that said, we're going to start back at the very beginning with a little demo of an ink on paper pen. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with analog calligraphy or just need a refresher, you can really see an introduction to thick and thin stroke making so that we can apply that same principle to the digital realm. Pointed calligraphy dip pens come in lots of sizes and shapes, but what they all have in common is that they're made from metal and come to a sharp point. That point is created by the meeting of two symmetrical pieces of metal called tines. The way that pen strokes are created with pointed pen nibs is through pressure. When you press down on a pointed calligraphy pen, those two metal tines separate. The harder you press down, the further the two tines separate. Likewise, the less pressure you exert, the smaller the gap is between the tines. And at rest, of course, with no pressure whatsoever, the tines are flush together with no gap in between. Ink flows through the point of a nib, so when a pointed pen is inked and you're writing without any pressure, the width of your written stroke is only as wide as that of the point of your nib. This means that writing with no pressure gives you a very thin stroke, but as you increase pressure, ink flows like a river between the gap in the two tines. The harder you press down, the wider the pen tip becomes, and the thicker your calligraphy stroke is. When Apple created the Apple Pencil, they did an amazing job creating a stylus that emulates the real pressure sensitivity of lots of different art tools, from paintbrushes to calligraphy pens. In Procreate, the behavior of this pressure sensitivity depends on the programming of the brush you're using. So if you have a well-designed Procreate calligraphy brush programmed with pressure sensitivity that matches a traditional metal nib, then you'll be able to use those same principles that you use in analog calligraphy on your iPad. Let's now take a closer look at what is possibly the most important setting for a well-programmed calligraphy brush in Procreate. Here, I've tapped on one of my own brushes, but you can open absolutely any drawing or lettering brush you have to follow along here with me. I'm going to draw some basic calligraphic strokes in the drawing pad side of my brush studio. Then, I'm going to adjust the setting called Streamline, which I have programmed to maximum in my own brush as a default. You can instantly see how Streamline impacts the smoothness of a stroke. Streamline was created to counteract the effect of the plastic Apple Pencil tip against the slippery glass screen of your iPad. A real pen is able to grip onto paper to stabilize itself, but since the iPad can't do that, Streamline was created as a digital solution. Here I've drawn a letter using maximum Streamline strength. Then I've gone back in and adjusted that strength down to 0 and written the same letter again. And for a third comparison, I'll use 50% Streamline. I assure you that I wrote these letters at the same speed using identical pressure, so it's very clear that the digital correction that Streamline provides creates the most fluid calligraphy. Just look at how the transitions from downstroke to upstroke, in other words, the transition from exerted pressure to released pressure, is fluid with Streamline turned up high, but it becomes rough and clumsy when there's no compensation for the slippery screen. Same goes for the upstrokes, which are wriggly without Streamline on as a result of the plastic pencil sliding against the glass. Now you can probably see how important it is to have the right brush for the job. Think of it this way. You can never play a beautiful sonata on an out-of-tune piano. You might have the technical skill and the practice and the intuition, but if your instrument is poor, your skills simply cannot shine. Likewise, you cannot create pointed pen calligraphy on the iPad if you're using a brush which inherently is not programmed to create thin strokes when you reduce your pressure and thick strokes when you exert pressure. There are lots of amazing brushes out there that are optimized for different styles of Procreate lettering. Just as different painters prefer different brushes, so too do Procreate lettering artists. So please be open-minded about experimenting with a number of brushes until you find the perfect fit for you. If you don't currently have any premium calligraphy brushes, just snag the one that I give away for free through the link in the description. This will certainly get you started, and for all you know, it might end up being your favorite. Now we're moving on to technique, which is equally as important as tools, of course. The number one mistake that I see iPad calligraphers making, and honestly lots of analog calligraphers too, is they write too fast. Plain and simple. I know how tempting it is to want to write calligraphy at the same speed as your everyday handwriting, but the reality is that drawing calligraphy should be nowhere close to as fast as your handwriting. There are so many considerations when forming a calligraphic letter in terms of stroke direction, shape, and pressure changes throughout the stroke. When writing quickly, it's just not possible to make the smooth pressure transitions required for elegant calligraphy. So to summarize, if you find yourself struggling to create smooth, elegant, thick and thin strokes in your iPad calligraphy, remember these three things. You must have a well-programmed brush optimized for calligraphic pressure sensitivity. Without that, no matter your technical skill, you cannot override the brush's shortcomings. 2. Making sure that Streamline is turned on is the best way to compensate for a pen that cannot grip its writing surface. As an aside, I should say that lots of people ask me about iPad screen protectors, specifically ones that emulate paper texture. And I just want to say that I do not use these because I simply don't like them. I find they reduce the clarity of my screen, they don't help me make nicer calligraphy, and they wear down my Apple Pencil tip very quickly. But if you want to read more about my reasoning behind not using a screen protector, I've linked my blog post about iPad accessories below. And finally, point number 3, write extremely slowly, taking care with every pressure increase, especially around curves. So now that you understand the techniques and considerations for smooth up and down strokes, how do you go about practicing that? Well, I have tried to make this very easy and free for my subscribers. I offer a lot of free, downloadable Procreate practice files that allow you to trace my calligraphy. And if you do so slowly and with care, you will find that in addition to learning new letter forms and flourishes, you'll be practicing your up and down, thick and thin strokes as well. Just like my free calligraphy starter brush, this is part of my lettering toolkit, which is linked below. I release a new free download every single month, but at the time of filming this, I have more than a dozen practice files available. Here you can see me tracing one of my letter exemplar practice sheets, using care to emulate the width of each stroke just as much as the shape of the letter itself. Thank you so much for following along. Please continue to leave your questions in the comments so that I can get more ideas for future videos that will help you. And don't forget to tag me in your work on Instagram if you create anything from my tutorials or my books or my free downloads. See you back here next week.